to help you through what's difficult for a lot of people. So yes, I do. Whether that's in the context of resilience, mindfulness, balance, whatever, any of those concepts. I try not to talk in aphorisms and small quotes from philosophers and try and make it more real. But yes, I do try and bring it in work because I do genuinely believe that it will, and this is a question I had for Will, we didn't get to, maybe get to on the panel, was what is our role in evangelically helping others if we are in a system and we think Stoicism has so the benefits for us as individuals, what's our role in helping others to get to the same place?
That's very well said. So if you think of your philosophical studies, and you're still going, you're not quite finished, you've got your dissertation to write, don't you? But you've done much of the coursework, yes, if not all of it. Done all of that. If you were to reflect and think, well, what are the, and it doesn't have to be Stoicism, what are either the elements of your study that you think you've gotten most out of, and that can be pure pragmatism, it's really helped in life, or it can be the pure joy of studying the thing. What have you gotten most out of? And it doesn't have to be Stoicism, but we're docking your pay if it isn't.
Well, I would extend it to, because I wouldn't say I'm yet a Stoic. There's lots of attractions to it. I am absolutely, when you think of all the different schools of ethics, whether it's duty ethics from the Germans or consequentialism, Greek virtue ethics are what get me up at night and what I love reading, getting back and looking at the original texts. And, you would say that, Julie, yes. But yeah, it's so more real. At the moment, I'm reading they're very light, but the Stephen the books on Greek mythology, etc. Which are humanizing the gods and even that. It's also interesting and well. There's just better storytellers than Kant, and I find it much more accessible than that sort of stuff too. So that's the stuff I go into, and philosophical logic, because I think the philosophical logic has application in all our areas of life, whether it's work, relationships, society. You can apply those concepts really broadly. We are the sum of the decisions and the choices we make, and philosophical logic to make sure that we're making the best decisions we can.
All right, that makes sense. I'm going to go a little bit back to an observation that was made earlier, and that maybe we shouldn't teach philosophy to young people. But what's your view on that? Because I disagree with that, but where are you on that?
Where am I on that? I don't do it right now, but a few years back, I was in the primary ethics program in New South Wales. I'm not sure if Victoria has the equivalent, but in New South Wales, do you have scripture for kids in public schools where you go off and you can, if you're Catholic, you go to a Catholic group, if you're Hindu, you go to Hindu, okay. In New South Wales, there's also a stream which is called ethics, which goes from kindy through to year 7, and it's really civics, if you like. But I was teaching for 2 years kindergarten kids ethics. And to give you an example of the sorts of stuff you're teaching kindergarten kids, here's an example. There's a party, and pizza arrived. It's got 8 pieces, and there are 7 of you. You all have a piece of pizza. There's 1 piece of pizza left. How do you work out who gets the 8th piece of pizza? And the way these kids get into it, so, well, Johnny doesn't have much money. Johnny should get it. Johnny loves pizza. The way they start to think about it, I think there's absolutely no issue with getting them started. I don't think you need to have fully formed concepts to get into it. The other reason we get them started is because they are far better at disagreeing with each other than our parliamentarians or anyone else. The standard of contest in public life these days is horrendous. And now I'm getting on my soapbox. So we need to get our kids learn skills to be able to disagree with respect again. Otherwise, we're doomed. We need to be able to have contest and disagree and not get to these polarized positions that's happening all over the world at the moment.
All right, Crystal, another question that I noticed, because I reckon you can handle them. So, so you're studying philosophy. I've read the old book. Do we think more corporate leaders really should have a broader study of philosophical reasoning, and indeed perhaps just broader study more generally? You have had, you've done accounting, you've done law, you did the MBA. I shouldn't say this, but we used to call them after bugger all. But you have had a lot of technical study as well, and you've consciously decided to broaden it out into non-technical space. Do you think corporate leadership would be better if there was much more there?
Unequivocally, yes.
And why?
Well, I'm a much bigger believer in the British. I think it's probably the US as well. I'm not sure, but the British system where it doesn't really matter what you studied at uni. It's sort of after you've done that, you decide what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Well, here in Australia, much of the time, to me, I decided to get into law in Queensland and to get the score I needed to decide when I was 15, I wanted to be a lawyer. That's sort of what you have to do in Australia, which is crazy.
And it's crazy.
It's crazy. So what it means is a lot of corporate leaders in Australia are like me, apart from the philosophy bit, in that we've all been really well trained in our very narrow vocation. And we try to make up for that by having diverse boards, so you bring people in on boards who bring the skills that you don't have, but that doesn't work because they're all the same as well. But, so yes, we would benefit from it through the education system where we, I think what's the classics BC? What's the one everyone does in the UK? BCOM. It's like it's philosophy, classics, and
GCSE.
So yeah, but it's basically liberal arts. It's a fantastic generalist degree on the Greek philosophers, on the politics of Magna Carta, all of that.
Philosophy, politics, and economics.
That's
yeah.
That's a nice grounding for anyone. And if half of corporate Australia had something like that, we'd be making better decisions. I think it also does go to morality, ethics. When you do and grow up in the vocational way that I have through education, including an MBA, you get a very narrow view of what success is. And by and large, until very recently, that was shareholder returns. And that means a lot of our corporate leaders lack the social context to understand the corporate's role in a broader cosmopolitan world that we're talking about here. And so we've seen the downsides of that over recent years, whether it's the Royal Commission into advice, some of the, I won't name other corporate names because I get in trouble with peers, but there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for Australia's corporate leaders to really go into a civics course at its heart and understand their obligations and their duty to something broader than shareholders.
Yeah, right. You're right into the thing about duties, and of course, any leader, really, one of the key roles of leader is telling the story and giving meaning. If you haven't thought broadly enough, it's actually very hard to give a relevant meaning, isn't it? So that's particularly sad. So the duties bit is very, very, very important. So well said. Otherwise, some of the things that are said are pretty shallow.
Yes.
Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. And I wholeheartedly agree. It does make sense that we have more breadth in our corporate leadership and in their educational programs. And I think there are some moves to go that way, I can tell. But I'm going to take us to something, I'm going to take us on a little bit of an aside, if it's all right. I want to just talk about the practicality of some of the different forms of philosophy. So Stoicism is often seen as a very practical philosophy. So it's useful and is often seen as useful in resilience theory. It's often the basis of resilience theory. Will's basically reinforced with us that it's also very pro-social. And in fact, you really can't have one without the other. They're deeply connected, so it's a good thing to do. And I did give you a little bit of a warning about this, but it's not the only game in town, right? Philosophically. And I'll be interested, have you had time to prep for this? Because I didn't give you much time to read this.
I did it over my soup at lunch.
Did it over your soup at lunch? I said to Chris, I'm going to ask a question just because I just need someone to talk to about this. So while I'm here, so there are quite a few people who I know come to Stoicism having first explored existentialism. and I'm going to do my potted version of existentialism, which is one of the key ideas in existentialism is, well, you're actually responsible for finding your meaning. Right? That's a proper philosopher would rip me to shreds for that simplification, but you basically you have agency, and you've got to make your own sense out of the madness.
Start with nothing.
And you start with absolutely nothing. And a lot of people find existentialism, to my mind, it's helpful for deconstructing the nonsense that's around. It helps you learn to challenge. And there is a lot of nonsense around society, including the nonsense that people have bought into, that you need to live a certain type of life to be happy. You need a faster car, you need a prettier partner, you need a bigger house, you need flashier shoes, all of which is complete nonsense. And that's a heads up. I'm going to come back to that after we've done this little chat. And then people go to Stoicism because you've still got a lot of agency. In fact, I think you've got a huge amount of agency, because Stoics haven't actually left a lot around as to how do you apply the four virtues. By the way, everybody, I don't call them virtues, I call them arete, because it means excellence, right? It's excellence in living, right? It's not the same as monotheistic religious virtues. They really are quite different. But it gives you a structure. There are virtues to focus on. There are ways to think about your role in society, and indeed there are duties that you should fulfill. So my view is that's a little bit like what people are going through in life generally. The problem with no religion or no philosophy is you're kind of left in a wash of a kind of mild hedonism, which leaves you directionless and which opens you up for suffering, and Stoicism gives you some sort of frame of reference. What do you reckon to that, particularly given that you actually entered a philosophical scheme of study with the idea of what's it all mean anyway?
Yeah, I guess both existentialism and Stoicism are relatively deterministic in that what's going to happen is going to happen. For me, the distinction, there's a couple of, I think existentialists might have an issue with you going to hedonism, because that's not the only way you necessarily go if you're an
Absolutely.
if you went down that school. But I think the bigger difference, and it connects to what Will was talking about, is it lacks that connection to the broader cosmopolitan social world that we live in. It's all about you. And I think Stoicism needs to do a better job, and Will's at the forefront of it, because I mean, criticisms I receive about talking about Stoicism is it's also perceived to be all about the self, the individual, and very little about society. So we have to do a much better job of better articulating, I think, the role and duty we have to our brothers and sisters more broadly. But that is also a distinction between existentialism, to my mind, and Stoicism. It is bigger, that and the system.
Yep.
And having a system that I think, to be honest, is sort of the arete has shown the test of time as a framework that is easily understood, I think, accessible, which means it's able to have more application, which I think is really important as well as we get into more of society asking these questions and looking at better ways to live. I think Stoicism wipes the floor with existentialism.
Yeah. Well, it gives you a frame, and it gives you that connection, to community. There's no question of that. So, likewise, in terms of, you have a lot of younger people working for you, you have a lot of younger people working for me, and there is a fair amount of mild hedonism as a philosophy. And Bill Irvine, one of the great books, if you haven't read it, is The Art of Stoic Joy by Bill Irvine. It's a great introductory book, but you can also read it if you're fairly well versed in the philosophies as well. And Bill starts off by saying, here's why you should have a philosophy. He just basically argued the case for consciously having a philosophy. That's his starting point. And so then one of the questions I'd ask is, well, for me, I hardly agree with that. I kind of go, have a religion or have a philosophy, by all means, you can even have both, right, if you want. I've just gone with one. You could probably guess which one. What do you think of that as a proposition? That it's actually important to have a framework. You can adjust it, modify it, strengthen it, abandon it, and start again. But having somewhere other than mild hedonism will give you a more fulfilling existence. Is that a reasonable thing to say? Would you agree with Bill Irvine?
Yes, I would. I don't know that it necessarily needs a fully thought through framework.
Yep.
You could start with just be more reflective, be more self-aware, start there, which is probably how I got to philosophy to a degree as well. Was I generally do test myself on various things quite a lot, and so that self-reflection takes you down those paths as I guess the catalyst and start. So start there because a lot of the younger generation aren't necessarily as reflective as maybe they could be. That might be totally unfair. But my experience is they're in a hurry. They're trying really hard. They're earnest, but I don't know how much they reflect as much as they should. So I guess I do agree, but I have to say I agree because business doesn't work without frameworks and rules and how you do it and codifying it sometimes, and the codification of it makes it more accessible to more people. So I get that point. But yeah, absolutely for me, having a framework is better than not having a framework, but you don't necessarily need to go all the way to being a sage in Stoicism. To that's small steps. Just start thinking about things more deeply, please.
Got it. Thank you, Chris. All right. So I've been asking questions away. Now, are there any questions from the floor, Chris? Lynn, would you like to come up and ask a question?
Correct. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for sharing. Just expanding on the point about self-reflections, you might agree that there's similarity between self-reflection and quarterly financial review, where you'll be analyzing it, but then you probably need something to analyze against. And whether you analyze against last year's performance or self-reflection against yourself last week or last month, or if there is something that you measure against. So when you do your self-reflection, what do you reflect against, or is it a framework
In the work context?
In any
Stoic philosophy context?
Yes. How do I do it? Again, maybe a little bit of Stoic logic as well here. I live and die by the share price of Perpetual. That is the. I wake up with the share price is up. Everyone's happy. Share price is down. Everyone's sad. Now I don't judge myself on that. I judge myself on the decisions that we've been making during that quarter. Let's say the quality of those decisions. And how we've come to make those decisions, because going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, the people are increasingly lacking the skills to disagree with each other, which the ability to disagree is really important to making good decisions. So, whenever I build a team, I'm building a team of lots of different people with lots of different skills and experiences, which means you have it's exhausting because you're having really difficult conversations all the time, because you've got, an introvert sitting over here, an extrovert who's dominating the conversation. You have to pull the introvert in, but the two things they say are the two things that really matter, and everything that the extrovert said doesn't matter. All that sort of stuff. But in doing that, I'm always looking at, okay, so how do we get to the decision? Okay, there's a good process to get a decision, tick. Could we have improved on that? I should have drawn that out, I should have shut that down. I judge myself on that very harshly because ultimately a lot of big decisions happen in a room in 1 hour, synthesizing a lot of different information. I then go through the process we've come to get that decision, because once again, whether the stock price goes up or down, I don't control. In making a decision, there are 10 inputs, 4 or 5 of which I have no control over. And so when I generally make a decision, an example would be there's a 60% chance of making $100 and a 40% chance of making $0. In that case, you should make that decision on balance because odds are you'll make money. But there's a 40% chance you get 0. And so if you do get 0, you'll be criticised by all sorts of people. But my self-reflection will be, that's okay. It was a good decision. It was the right thing to do. So I'm constantly assessing the quality of the decisions my team and I are making. And it's less about the report that comes out at the end of the quarter. So how do I bring that back? So that's the importance of logic from philosophy as well as the ethics of it. There's not enough logic applied to decision making. Well, not just in corporate life, in personal life. There's the application of logic in personal relationships that would really go a long way too. So that's how I'm doing it. And so really what I'm doing there in the Stoic context is trying to become more wise as we go along and test myself. And I think one of the questions we might have later on is how do you tell if you're gaining wisdom or not. I think some of that is the confidence through discipline and the application of logic, and a sort of acceptance and less stress about decisions because we're doing this the right way. It's okay. Everyone relax a bit. So I'm not sure if that answers your question though.
Yeah. So it's focusing on the process rather than the outcome, which a lot of modern Stoics often talk about in terms of the way you make decisions or what you concern yourself with individually. There's often an example of playing tennis, which is you focus on playing your shot in the process to play your shot. Whether you win it or not, lots of things can happen then, not up to you. So that's certainly the case. Now, any other questions from the floor? That was a really good question. We've got a Damien. No.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for your time. I've got this idea for a revolution, and I think you're the right kind of guy to head it up. So you were talking about how you've read a lot of Greek, ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. You know that back in the day it was widely accepted that the common good was a very important part of, I guess, leadership. And you've talked here today about how we need to be in it for each other, etc. And that's equally important. My observation is that in Australia we've got something that you'd be well aware of in your position. We've got the Corporations Act, which has a fiduciary duty for directors of corporations, where they are personally, directors of corporations are personally responsible for making decisions.
And liable.
And liable. This is the key bit, right? As in the prospect of being thrown in jail, fines, whatever, personally, if you do not act in the best financial interests of the corporation. Hopefully you can see where I'm going here. That seems to be, to me, just about as far away from encouraging people to act, or corporations to act in accord with the common good as you could possibly get. It's kind of like a, Gordon Greco, what's his name? The greed is good. Gordon Gekko, that guy. It's kind of like people are going to be greedy anyway, right? But having a law that says if you're the director of a corporation, you have to act in the best financial interest. Stick your fingers in your ears for every other possible interest. It's purely about dollars. What do you reckon about a tweak to the Corporations Act that includes expanding that beyond just fiduciary duty?
I'm going to bring up the mic. Thanks. Cheers. Sorry, we cut the budget for the mics. So here we go.
I've got probably a couple of things to say about that. I think there's real merit in looking at that clause and the primacy of shareholders over all else. I would say that. I'd also say that I don't come across many people in corporate life who are inherently bad people who are trying to do the wrong thing by society. The other thing that introduces for senior executives and board members is in effect bringing in factors again that you don't control. So this is all about trying to get the control, and but it is happening every day and more in corporate life. In superannuation now, it's really clear that you need to take into consideration environmental factors and sustainability, notwithstanding the fact that in the short term that may have negative financial consequences. There's a general view that in the longer term it will bring better returns. But I think more fundamentally, yeah, we can tweak the Corps Act and make it more explicit that it's about more than shareholders. By and large, big corporates are moving that way anyway. I think it's more about back to the skills and capabilities, because again, this is not bad people. It's just a lot of leadership that don't have a broad enough experience or skill set to know about how to weigh these other factors in the face of that shareholder primacy. So it's education, broader education beyond net present value and capital asset pricing model, and there's lots of that. And getting into factors and getting exposure to all of that experience that by and large, a lot of corporate Australia's leaders have quite narrow experiences. So education experience, I think, are more important than changing the act.
Yeah, well said. Indeed, I'm not even sure that part of the Corps Act even encourages greed, because it possibly encourages conservatism. So you can actually make a safe decision that is not in the shareholders' interests, and you're still fine under the Corps Act. So it's probably bad in 62 separate ways. But certainly I'd agree. It's nearly most of the big enterprises now are taking ESG very, very seriously. Even those who don't really believe feel that they have to because the shareholders do. So that'd be a thing. Great question. And an ethics question it is, how to live in the corporate space. Okay. Any other questions? Atif.
I'll just pick up. Chris, thanks for the session. Have you settled down to Stoicism, or you're still open to exploring other philosophies as well?
What are you selling?
Depends on what you're buying.
Rastafarianism.
So let's say maybe absurdity, then I particularly find it kind of bridges a lot between existentialism and Stoicism as well. And not to mention, though, East Albert Camus pretty much wrote the myth of the Sisyphus in kind of a homage to the Stoic writers and Thomas earlier as well. So
yeah, I think it's fair to say Epictetus would not be happy with me because I am still window shopping and trying to take, I wouldn't say take, trying to understand as much as I can before committing to anything. And one of the things about a BA in philosophy is you bobble around the top of a lot of different topics, and you don't have the time, particularly for me, to dive into everything the way you like to fully understand and fully appreciate, and to make a good decision around what's really you're going to pursue going forward. So I think my answer would be I've got a lot more work to do to better understand a lot of these philosophies before I land on anything. But it's really fun. It's also really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. The Church of the Latter-day Stoics is seeking membership. So the great thing actually about Stoicism, of course, Seneca was one of the most prolific writers and was really the most prolific writer on Stoicism that survived. But Seneca often draws from other schools. In fact, often from the mortal enemies, the Epicureans, right? Because Seneca said, and this is a very sensible approach, which is no one basically has primacy or a full right or wisdom. So you take it where you find it. And so I think just because you identify with some of the ideas in Stoicism doesn't mean you have to wear the badge and get the tattoo. Atif does have a tattoo at the back of his left leg. So great question, and I think that nearly brings us to an end, doesn't it? And it just remains me to say thank you very much, Chris. We'll be seeing you a little bit later, but thank you. Give him a warm round of applause, please. So it now falls on me to take you through a Stoic meditation. We did this last time, and it seemed to go down pretty well. So there are two primary types of Stoic reflection that are often recommended. There's the morning and the evening reflection. Now, the evening reflection is all about reflecting on the day. What did you do well? What did you do badly? I'll actually come to that in a few minutes' time, but we'll talk first of all about a classic morning meditation. I'm going to take you through the one that I do. Now, so for this to happen, I need you to relax, close your eyes. Love telling people to relax. It usually raises their pulse rate and gets the blood pressure going the opposite direction. So close your eyes. Now, I'd like to just say when you close your eyes, this is not because I'm about to take you on. So you close your eyes and just listen to the instructions and follow them. Okay. So first of all, just be centered and aware of what's going on around you. So can you feel the coolness of your air in the face? Can you feel the back of your chair against your back? Can you feel your feet in your shoes? Become aware of your body in space. It's touching parts of your physical surroundings. Pause and just reflect under no stress, no pressure. You don't have to nail anything here, just feel where your body physically touches the world. Just remember. And then become aware of the sounds around you. If I actually shut up for a minute, you might hear the hum of some machinery. You might hear the sound of your own breath. You might hear the rustle of clothes. And you've just become someone. Not a cow, you don't need to. Now you're going to go through a Stoic reflection. Now in Stoicism, there are 4 arete, the 4 virtues, and there are 3 disciplines. The first of those disciplines is the discipline of desire. That is, be careful what you want in life, and we're going to do a reflection on that. The second is assent, which is only agree to that which is a rational thought. The third is action. Broadly speaking, do good things. Now, but first of all, and the one that has primacy here, is desire. Only want the things that are appropriate and in your control. And those things generally relate to your character. So the first part of the reflection is to say to yourself, my primary objective today is to build my character. And that's what makes me progress, because the only thing I can take with me in all circumstances, is my character. So think about, imagine you're at the start of the day, think about how are you going to develop your character today? And a great way to think about this is, which of the 4 virtues are you going to deploy? Wisdom, justice, is it temperance, or is it courage? So reflect that you're going to develop your character today, that is your purpose of your whole being. And which part of your character are you going to develop today and how? Now, in each day, we have things that must be done because we live in them. Let's get up. At least every second day, brush our teeth. We have to go to work. We have to look after the kids. Whatever we have to do, we have duties that we have to do. And often in amongst those duties, we have things we wish to achieve. Of course, the lists are often too long. I want you to reflect on just two things that you think you need to achieve today. What are the two things that during the day you want to achieve? Choose only two, because often that's all we can really get to. Now I want you to choose one of those two. And imagine that you want to do it, but something is going to stop you. Something is going to impede your progress. Something is going to be an obstacle to your progress. Imagine what will stop you. It could be more than one thing. I want you to imagine what's going to stop you progressing. I want you to imagine how you're going to respond. And you're going to respond like a sage, even though you could never be one. Imagine yourself responding without getting irritated, because you know this is just the nature of the thing. Obstacles will be in the way. Imagine yourself responding with gratitude. Great. This hasn't gone well. An opportunity for me to be patient and disciplined. And imagine yourself proactively problem solving, because you're no longer stressed and angry. Your mind is clear. When your mind is clear, you do your best problem solving. So something's gone wrong. Imagine what it is, and imagine how you would respond as a trainee student. And having reminded yourself how you would respond as a trainee Stoic, note to yourself that you've just done work on your character and you will do so throughout the day. Now come back to your body and space. So feel where your body touches the rest of the world. The feel of the seat underneath you. The feel of your glasses on the nose. The feel of your cloth on the skin. And being connected with the world again, open your eyes. All right. So in about 6 minutes, you've just done a Stoic meditation. So you've prepared yourself for the day ahead. And you've prepared yourself for the day ahead because you reminded yourself that basically the Stoic project is to be the best person you can be, best you can be. That means being rational and pro-social. It doesn't mean that it's all about you, because you're connected to the rest of the planet. There's a gentleman who's passed away called Becker, who believed that one great way to characterize what Stoics thought is the purpose, what you should desire, is basically to be a better character. And anything, therefore, that life throws at you is for the greater good because you could use it. Everything else is a project. So now, having reminded yourself you're there to develop a better character, you've thought about your projects for today. And then you did what's called premeditation or PM. You imagined it going wrong. Then you imagine yourself behaving appropriately in a rational, calm, and pro-social way, in spite of the fact that went wrong. Not getting angry, not getting stressed, not getting anxious, not getting depressed, not getting what is me, but calmly addressing the problem solving. In doing so, you've prepared yourself, laid down mental tracks to behave that way during the day. It's not perfect, but it will help. And in there's a little bit of mindfulness as well, because mindfulness is helpful and effective. And that's the end of the Stoic meditation. You've just done a classic morning Stoic meditation. Well done. Sorry it's a bit late in the day, but usually I do like to sleep in. So here we go.
Is a panel. And I'd like to invite back to the stage Will Johncock, Chris, Roger, Denise Gibbons. Denise is the founder of Southern Star Stoics, which is an online group we started up this year. And Sumedha Pagadala, who's a member of the Melbourne Star. And
Oh yes, yeah, there's a bit of that.
thank you.
Safety hazard. And we'll see.
It's going to be very cozy, isn't it?
Yeah.
If I sit at this end, maybe I can use this one and then you guys the long one.
Yeah. That's all right.
I think I've got one. I may have made mild edits to mine. So.
That's really interesting. It says, whatever you do, think for yourself, but these are the right answers.
That's right.
Excellent. We've lost one panelist already. I haven't even asked the first question.
Needs glasses.
Yeah, Hugh is really scary.
I will confess there are some notes on my list that haven't been replicated on your list, so you will have to listen carefully to the questions.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna start with just a question around how Stoicism can help us in what is often referred to now as the attention economy, in this sort of landscape where we have probably an unprecedented amount of demand upon our attention, and our attention is very easily fractured. And I think this actually relates, Chris, to something that you said before, talking about young people not reflecting as much as they could. And I think that that's probably not just young people who don't reflect as much as they could, but there do seem to be a lot of forces in play that are almost actively trying to prevent us reflecting. So how do we think we can deploy Stoic ideas in order to meet this very specific challenge? Who would like to go first? Will has a sparkle in his eye, like he has a really.
That's just
because
We're all trying to duck for cover. Pass along there. I'm gonna.
Do you want to have a frame?
I ended up with it. I shouldn't have looked at you. I think it's honestly, I was thinking of it earlier today that I think it was the first speaker was talking about the fact that we like the sound bites and the bite-sized little bits, and we don't seem to want to go into the depths of stuff. And I've noticed that on a lot of things, and it's not to do with even young people. And I don't have an answer in terms of Stoicism, because really to get the best benefit out of Stoicism, you need the deep work. And so I don't know whether we can, maybe we can have a TikTok person maybe that could be doing some dances to attract attention, but I think the challenge is having to do it. So, for example, I've been a Toastmaster for 16, 17 years. I love communication, I love the word, I love, yes, getting the ideas out there. But I've just noticed, certainly post-pandemic, when we were sort of pretty much doing it all online, people don't want to do the hard work. And like to put a really good speech together requires an art, it requires soul, it requires lots of work, but people don't seem to want to do that anymore. And I don't know what the answer to that is, Hugh. I think, I don't know the answer. I'll leave it to someone else to have a go.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's an answer, but definitely we need to be careful about what is most popular. We see Seneca tell us about this. We mentioned this morning, that you should be careful not to align your ideas with those which have the greatest number behind them. That's somewhat of a negative answer though to this question, because that's identifying the problem. It's not necessarily identifying the solution. How do we discern? How do we discern quality information? I think we should take into account that the Stoics are empiricists, so they look for patterns in the world. There could be something to that. How do we previously discern quality information? What are the key signs of that? And where do we see that being indicated in our present situation where we are searching for knowledge also?
One thing we could do is apply analytical skills, and I'm going to do it now by splitting the question up into components parts, right? So I think the attention economy is a little bit different from quality information, because I've listened to very long, very impressive sounding monologues with very low quality information. So if I split the two up. So first of all, attention economy. For those who've come to the Melbourne Store breakfast, they might have heard me talk about a book which is simply entitled Do Hard Things. And I've, I've chosen, I said, right there, what's the best way forward? I said, you don't want to do something, but you think it's important for you, do it. Do hard things. Choose things that challenge you. There are very rarely things that you can do by, a swipe of the finger. There are very rarely things that you can do quickly, and there are very rarely things you can do without consciously developing a skill. As you do so, you are rewiring yourself. Now, we do know from books like, there is actually a book called The Attention Economy. There was another one called The World Outside Your Head, that actually short dopamine hits are actually rewiring our brains in a very negative way. And the best way forward is to just do hard things, choose hard things. And of course, a very Stoic thing to do a hard thing. So do hard things. So that'll be the first thing. Then I'd go to something, Chris, you were talking about. You thought that philosophy was helping you make better decisions, and you were talking about philosophical logic. It's not a bad idea for us to all learn a little informal logic. There's even a book called Informal Logic. It's actually very formal, but that's not nonetheless its title. So learning a little bit of logic. So, the basics, which is, what is the premise? Is that a reliable premise? Is there any evidence? And do enough of us ask these questions? So two things, do hard things. And you don't need much, but learn a little bit of everyday logic. And in fact, it used to be taught in the classics. You were actually taught fallacies. You were taught, depending where you learned, from 6 to 12 fallacies. You learned logical fallacies, like ad hominem, attack the person would be a fallacy. It's not a basis for an argument. I'm going to pass over to Chris, because Chris, you might have something to say about logic and fallacies as testing whether information is reliable.
Yeah, I mean, they're tools as much as there are other tools for testing the reliability, the truth of what we think is knowledge. I was going on a slightly different tack though, so we've got to be careful not to condescend those who are using this format to learn, to improve themselves. So I think a lot of people are there trying to improve themselves. And one one thing the Stoics are good at is pithy little Twitter handles. You know, if it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it. That's gonna hit in there. Now, the problem is that on its own doesn't help much. So you do need to go and interrogate that, and how we do that. Yeah, absolutely. There are disciplines and frameworks and philosophical logic's one way to go and do that. How we get that next step is, I think, on us to engage better with those who use this medium, because we can't just say it's not going to work. We need to find ways to engage in different ways to the ways we have in the past.
I think the issue then is distraction though, because you might, it might come to you for the soundbite, but how do you then, you obviously need to work a lot with the people that are doing that to actually keep their attention on it, because there is so much out there, and our brains are designed for distraction. The shiny ball is just, it lights up our brain and we get that dopamine hit and we're off and running on to the next thing. So I don't know how you then get them to go and fight from that. But anyway, my thought.
I think I'll just add to kind of what's already been mentioned, but I do believe that part of discernment with quality information, because we are bombarded with a significant level of information on all sides in this day and age. And I think there is capacity within us as part of a larger self-reflection exercise that practicing Stoicism can afford us in our daily lives, where you can make a choice about the kind of information that you engage with and what you consider to be worthwhile of integration into your daily practices and for self-discipline generally. So it is very much, it could come via journaling, it could come via, who you choose to associate with, the kind of emotions that you choose to assign value to, but it's very much a lengthy, broad sort of process.
All right, thank you, everyone. Denise, if our friend Noel was here, I think he would say in response to your question, one of his favorite quotes is, "When the student is ready, the master appears." So the soundbite might bring them in, and if they don't then engage with the depth of the material, they weren't ready to engage with the depth of the material. If they're ready to engage with the depth of the material, they will. Let's move on to the second question. So this speaks to the fact that some criticisms of Stoicism bear on the fact that it is a relic from quite an ancient society, a society that was patriarchal, a society where they owned slaves, and I think in some cases just a society that was a long time ago with, perhaps a very different social context to our own. So how do you respond to these notions as, I guess, a suggestion that this is not a valid path to follow, that we shouldn't be seeking to learn from this? Ben?
Yeah. I'll kind of start the conversation, I guess, but I think the fact that it survives from an ancient slave-owning society doesn't necessarily mean that it is a direct relation to and supportive of the slave-owning society. It was very much standard at the time that was the kind of society that we lived in, and I'm sure that even some of the best emperors, even Marcus Aurelius, if he was to publicly denounce slavery, that would have had wide-ranging economic impact and on his own power as well. So disseminating Stoicism thoughts that the way that he did was his way and other philosophers' way of trying to change the morals and ethics of the time without dismantling the economy of the time as well, which I think is important. Really, else like to.
Yeah, I think within Stoicism we see that they're not endorsing slave culture by any means. And so as a result, it's somewhat progressive. We also see that there are somewhat progressive attitudes towards women within the Stoic canon, let's say. They're not as progressive as we would like, but they're everything like this is incremental. And so I don't necessarily see a problem with incorporating Stoic ideas into modern ideas. We do incorporate a lot of ideas from ancient slave cultures into modern cultures. And this is yet another one. It's not therefore carrying the slave culture with it.
I also think we've got to be very careful about imposing our current ethical context on those sorts of things. When you think back to the Magna Carta and the founding fathers in the US and what wonderful what they produced was wonderful, but it didn't include women. You know, it seems to be to me to cut your nose to spite your face, to not take the good out of those historical contexts, notwithstanding there's some things around the periphery that we don't agree with. I mean, the example today, I guess, would be like a Peter Singer, who is very strong on animal rights. We may look back in 100 years and be horrified at the way we treat animals and those sorts of things, but it's not because we're bad people. There's different context, and as I say, as you said, incrementalism I think is important in this as well. But you've got to be very careful to impose your context on the past.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, it is a philosophy, so it's a lot like it's a good way of living. So I don't necessarily think it's where it's come from. It's a bit like I remember my teenage child saying to me, asked me a question. I responded to it, and then I got the answer of, what would you know of being a teenager in the 21st century? Which is a fabulous answer. I just laughed. But as I said to them, it's the context. Your context is different, but our rules of values and how we get along together as humans hasn't really changed. You know, it's just the context. Yes, you've got mobile phones. I didn't have mobile phones. You know what I mean? But how we talk to each other and how we respect each other and our values hasn't changed really. And I think that's the thing to remember. I mean, I have an issue with Stoicism in the sense of, you know, representation of women. But I think that that's about modernising Stoicism. It's not necessarily about changing how to have a good life and how you go about that. It's just making certain that it's more representative of our society, and so that you know, women are included in the leadership dialogue, if you like, of modern Stoicism. But again, as I said, I think that our values and our rules haven't changed really for thousands of years, but it's the context that's changed.
And just to add to that as well, we have far more freedom afforded to us in this day and age, regardless of gender, that would have been unknown during the time period that some of these texts actually were written in. And that includes freedom of choice for men and women, which includes access to information, and again, the ability to discern what is useful, what is not within the context of what you are doing. And the ability to, I think, as individuals, to follow our own moral compasses without being too focused on, you know, pre-existing classes that may have existed at the times. So, yeah.
I agree with everything that everybody said. Just a slight segue. The Stoics thought about slavery differently anyway, and there's a very important moral lesson. Remember that the quote, I believe, is something like, "He who controls that which you desire is your master." So they thought free persons could be slaves as well. And in fact, that most actually were slaves. And there's a lesson in that for us today when we pursue materialism or actually things that quite frankly do not matter in the Stoic tradition. You are a slave. And that's a sort of slap in your face, wake up, what you should desire. Sorry.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Building on what Roger said, I think maybe the problematic aspect of the slave component for the Stoics is that it ties in with the deterministic aspect of the philosophy. And so when Marcus Aurelius says, for instance, that if you are a slave, then that is your lot, and you are free if you accept your existence as a slave. That's underpinned by his belief in a deterministic world. I don't think there's many people in the room today who would be determinists. I could be wrong. That's possibly a big call. But I think there's a lot of modern Stoics who don't necessarily accommodate the deterministic aspect to the same degree that the ancients did. And once you don't, then some of the views, such as those on slavery, become quite removed, I think, from their original positions.
I estimate that at least 10% of the room are determined.
But it's not, they didn't have any choice in them.
Well, so Will, you kind of quite naturally segue us a bit further into this question, and this topic of discussion on the list here is fairly deep. So one of the things that is quite fundamentally different between now and 2,500 years ago is the depth of our scientific understanding of the universe, of, you know, to some extent our place in it. And that has significantly informed cultural mores. So one of the things that the questions talk about here is does our understanding of, for example, how our brains work as sort of little chemical factories that make us feel particular ways at a particular time, does that have implications for the idea of living according to nature, for the idea of being able to say, well, actually what I think is up to me, when there are probably people in the modern world who would say that to a great degree what we think is not up to us? Comments?
You want to have a crack at that?
I'll
have a crack, Denise?
I'll have a crack.
Go for it.
I do think that that the science is, you know, potentially enhances Stoicism, our understanding of some of the scientific stuff, because you know, I'm certainly a great believer that you know, we are a biochemical factory, and that, you know, you've only got to look at you know, what you eat can influence how or how much more effort you might have to put into remain a stoic and keep you cool and all those sorts of things. So, and I think it can enhance Stoicism if we look at those sorts of things. Also, and you were talking about, no, there's isn't there a psychiatrist in the room? We were talking about it at lunch.
There is, yes.
Yeah, we're talking about some of the mental illnesses as well that often are chemical differences in the brain. And so, yeah, but I think it only adds to it, really, to Stoicism, because you can still come back to the fundamentals of how to live a good life. And yes, if you've got to take into account more of the you know, what you're eating, all those sorts of things, then we need to include that in our learnings as well.
I might have a crack at this. I actually came to Stoicism, at least in one part, via strange and indirect route, which was through evolutionary psychology. So I did a first degree was a psych degree, and it was, and my specialty in year 3 was evolutionary psychology, and I did a lot of my third and my honours year was on evolutionary psychology. And the conclusion I reached was that the brain naturally rewarded you for pro-social behavior. So when the Stoics say it's what makes us distinctively human is the combination of rationality, which we can do better than any other animal, we think, and prosociality, which is to a certain extent hardwired. Basically, remember, prosociality was a survival skill, your ability to work within the group. And you actually got short-term neurochemical hits, is the thought. And that was the thinking at the time anyway when I was studying, so I should really come up to date. But there's no doubt there was an evolutionary benefit for collaboration. I think it's very broadly accepted and hasn't changed. That's what makes us human. So living according to nature is actually more consistent, I think, with at least the evolutionary science than it has ever been. So, and when I think about do I need to understand the precise cosmology or appreciate the precise cosmology of Stoicism to appreciate it? No, because it's actually designed to be appropriate for us. We're uniquely able in the animal kingdom to be rational, and we get enormous benefits from being pro-social. It's for us. Anything else on that?
I agree with everything Roger said. I would kind of like to ask everyone what they think about the Stoic distinction between the human capacity for reflection and rationality versus every other creature. And is that something that you agree with when you read it in 2024? Because I don't. And whilst I respect the time and the place in which it was written, I think it's incredibly speculative to say that only humans can reflect on their reason and their reason for being, the nature of themselves. That to me seems like a speculative aspect of the philosophy. And it's also found in Aristotle, of course, and so on.
Hey, we might have a real debate here. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, but what are you saying, that animals potentially have the ability to reflect on it, but then how do we know that? You know, like, I mean, it's not like we have access to their thinking or whatever. Is that what you're saying, Will?
That is definitely part of it, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to add, I can see where you're coming from, Will, because just because we cannot perceive it doesn't mean that it doesn't technically exist in some aspect.
No, and the Stoics haven't authored this position, they adopted it.
Yeah. All right, this could be fun. Okay, so we can't absolutely know. So dolphins and whales, for example, maybe not. Okay, so development of the human brain. Oh, this takes me back. All right, so we need one of the reasons we've got a bigger brain. So the theory goes there lots, at least 12 theories, if not 20, is because we've got a massive evolutionary advantage from being able to recognize not just the people in our tribe, but their characteristics. And as human tribes grew, lots of them would be able to just manage the load of complicated social actions and environments, which would change actually as the weather changed, right? So the more you were able to handle the problem solving socially as well as all the other practical problems. So, I mean, other things happen, like having an opposable thumb that develops your brain, all that sort of stuff. So, and language. So we actually have, as far as we know, the most complicated languages. And there's thoughts about whales and there's thoughts about dolphins, but even that, we're still miles ahead. And we can do abstract reasoning. We can even use maths as a language, right? So, but also they have good memories, but our particular symbolic memory, we've no evidence that any other animals got it. So it is possible that those animals have it. But as far as we know, we only know for sure that we can do it. We can totally abstract reason, and we can express that in language. We can remember hundreds, if not thousands, of different faces, right? And we can put names to hundreds of those. We can understand their characteristics. We can even subconsciously almost understand how they're going to interact with each other, what that facial expression means, and how we should problem solve and respond whilst doing a maths problem. Right? So that puts us in a cognitive degree of complexity that, although others might have it, and there are probably two species that possibly do, we're the only ones that we're sure do. Now, I used to raise dogs. My mum used to raise dogs, and dogs often seem terribly human, but they're not. it's shortcut cognitive development, right? And you can test it, but they're not. It does come down then to the article of faith. But I said, well, there's a lot of evidence that we have this stuff. There's much less evidence that animals do. So for those reasons, I still put us in a pretty unique position, and that for those reasons, I'd say it could be. Pyrrhonian skepticism. We should always be open to the possibility we're wrong, and I'd actually quite like to be wrong, because it's it's probably quite lonely for us to be here on this planet, the only humans, the only creatures with this complexity. So we should be open to be wrong, but I think the evidence is those two things in combination do put us in a pretty, that's what makes us uniquely human. And that's kind of what the Stoics would say, this is our nature, isn't it? These two attributes. We should stop this, shouldn't we? We're having a lot of fun. Yeah.
I don't know.
That's opening arguments. Did you want to join in, Judith?
Yeah, just thinking the audience.
I think you have to switch sides of the room. Yeah, but I suppose it comes down to how the Stoics define reason.
Yeah.
And what are you aware of when you're being rational? And if other creatures than humans are able to recognize their belonging to a group of like members who possess the same attributes as you, then that's already a tick. Sorry, some of us. with the Stoic definition of reason. Now we could go down the list regarding what rationality constitutes, and depending on how many factors non-human animals shared with human animals would be to determine the extent to which we think they're rational. And an ancient Stoic might come back to me and say, yeah, that's fine, but when we've already said we don't think that other creatures are as rational as humans, or they possess rationality whatsoever. So they might still have a reasonable response. And Rogers was also obviously a learned, reasonable response.
Look, I'll just point out that it's only a minor point, but in some ancient Greek thought, dolphins, whales, cetaceans were formerly human. Now, to me, that's an informal folk acknowledgement that those species in particular had a form of, or a quasi-human form of, well, I won't say reason, but yeah, intellection in some form.
That's really interesting, yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to go off on another tangent because we talk about living in according to nature, which then when you look at the human species, I don't want to get people to, but I'm just wondering how we ended up with patriarchy. Why is our system of, if it was in accordance with nature, how come we build everything around the male reproductive organ? To me, I just wonder how we got to that if it's supposed to be in accordance with nature. That's where I see the controversy in terms of that humans have somewhere along the line, for whatever reason. But anyway, I hope someone else has a comment on that. I'm sure they do.
Roger's got a comment on anything. Give him 35 seconds. He'll put something on.
Give it 70%. So the only thing is, and I think it's a really fair question. Can we have a separate conference on that? But I think the Stoics, their idea, well, look, I think there are multiple interpretations of according to nature. I think the one that modern Stoics tend to relate to is, because Stoicism does stress the primacy of reason, is reason and pro-sociality. Now, our society has chosen to progress down for a very long time, and hopefully it's correcting now, path left, patriarchy, right? You could quite reasonably argue from the Stoic position that that was an irrational position to take. And it was actually an anti-social position to take. So you could actually argue that Stoicism would say that the primacy of one gender over another or one sex over another is irrational. And it's certainly not pro-social, and particularly if it denies the rights of fellow human beings. So that would be a position to take. It's not Stoicism. In fact, you could argue it's anti-Stoic. That was society that's set up in that sort of unjust construct.
All right, we might continue this one over the drinks and dinner. Chris, you one of your replies, you mentioned not being evangelistic in sort of speaking about the benefits of philosophy in general, the considered life, let's call it. So the question of the panel then is, how can we present or be examples of the things that we think are good about the examined life, call them excellences, arete, virtue, whatever you like. How can we do that in our daily lives in a way that is helpful to the people around us and is respectful to the people around us, and maybe helps them, get something better out of life, even if they don't adopt our philosophy? Because I think maybe Will, you mentioned this earlier as well. It's like not everyone is a philosopher. We can't judge people, or maybe it was the other word. We can't necessarily judge people or judge ourselves as being superior because we are following this philosophical path.
We're Stoics, not Stoics.
Yeah, look, to me, it's nothing more complicated than sort of leading by example. I think the difficulty is you don't want to have this ongoing overarching monologue every time you do something. The reason I did that was because that's going to get pretty old pretty fast. But that said, if you're interacting with your family or people at work in very stressful situations, and you're being temperate and you're being considered and respectful of others, at some point you're going to start to differentiate yourself from others, and people will ask what's going on there. Because I don't think there's a successful strategy would be to keep explaining through measuring lines. I think it's through example, and I think it will become apparent to those around you, and hopefully elicit questions questions and intrigue around why is Chris able to handle situations there differently to some of the other executives, and that will hopefully then lead to them asking more questions and getting more involved. But I don't know that there's much more to it than leading by example.
I think leading by example also, as I'll talk about later, instruction over condemnation is pivotal to the Stoic method. So the idea that if you see unvirtuous or what they call wicked or vicious actions, behaviours, thoughts in others, is to firstly think about when those were exhibited by yourself, and accordingly, if you were to condemn them, then you would be condemning yourself. And this isn't that kind of philosophy. Instead, it's one of instruction and collective growth.
Yes, I think, it's leading by example, but it's also, I think, using, bravery and courage to speak up when you see things that aren't right, and that, and actually doing that. To give you an example, I got into I didn't intend to incite the person. It was a political person. I didn't intend to incite him, but he got very defensive and got very aggressive. And anyway, I walked away. The next day I went back and I apologised to him, because I said I had no intentions of, getting you to be excited over that. I really wanted to just have a discussion about it. And look, I really admire you. I like any person, any political person who steps into that realm deserves us to give them credit, even if they're talking absolute to put themselves into that position is a huge courage. And so, as I said to him, I didn't intend to incite you to, get angry. So what I'm saying is, the point is that have the bravery to even own up your own mistakes, but certainly speak up if you see someone acting inappropriately, try and get some change that way.
And I think to add to that as well, in terms of how do we present that in productive ways in our lives, I think it's important, especially in this day and age, to remember that there's no sort of end goal, or there's no like goalpost with something like this. It's very much a continuous cycle. It's expected to be a continuous cycle. You will likely, as others have mentioned here, you will likely not respond as you ideally would have liked to in certain situations. And then if you self-reflect on that and are honest with yourself about what would be the right way to go about it, and then live accordingly and put that into action. So it's important not to think that there's like, there's this end goal at this point in time, but understand that it will have, highs and lows.
I've said enough, Hugh.
What's next to you?
Well, I'll leave the audience with one to dwell on in relation to this. If we only lead by example, how do we deal with people looking at us and going, oh, well, they're like that because that's how they are, and I could never be like that because it's not my character to be calm, but it's that person's character. So there's one for us to carry over into later discussions. Let's finish up here with the panel talking about how we can assess our own progress, essentially. So how do we know, how can we tell that we are growing in arete, in wisdom, in courage, what have you? Like the question says, we're never going to be the sage. I actually think it's important that the sage is a completely inattainable goal because it allows you to continually make progress towards it. But how do we assess that, knowing that we will always be subject to lose our temper sometimes, to act unjustly? How do people on the panel assess themselves against the mission that they've set for themselves and their character?
I think the short answer from my perspective is like aim for better than yesterday. As long as you are, again, aware of your own shortfalls and hope to work on them going forward. But I think that's the key thing, just to be better than yesterday and be very proactive going forward.
I'd have to agree with that. I just don't think, and it's a challenging one. It's a challenging one. Chris will probably relate to this when you're in a leadership role. I'm actually doing some research in the whole thing of power and the impact on humanity, how we change when you're in a power position. It's very difficult, I think, to be objective about yourself. And I suppose maybe you need to ask for feedback from other people, but personally, I just try to see that I'm feeling content in my life and sort of moving forward, learning, all those sorts of things. But yeah, it's challenging, I think, to be objective about yourself.
Yes, it is. I think for me, wisdom is humility. Am I always contextualizing myself? This morning I was speaking about the systems side of Stoicism a lot. And so if I always contextualize myself within that kind of view, then it feels like I'm thinking in a way that the Stoics might. And that for me would be wisdom.
I think related to that is, in terms of living your life and tools, only a few weeks ago I started journaling and sort of jotting down stuff each night, good and bad reflections. And I haven't done it yet, and I'm not doing it every night. But I think if I look, that's one way to be able to look back over a month or two and say, is there progression there? Is there not? What areas are working, what's not, why? So I think, practically speaking, it's just a great way of self-reflection.
One other thing I wanted to add as well is the importance of kindness as well to yourself, especially. I think that's something that sometimes we, as Stoics and potentially anyone else who follows certain philosophies may have to hold ourselves to a particular standard, which is both admirable, but we also need to be realistic. And I think kindness to ourselves and others is very key.
Yeah, related to that, actually, Sam, remember that progress is not perfectly linear. You'll have good days and bad days. Kind of goes, what? So it's, you know, a bit like that. So you have to, when you're assessing progress, take a slightly longer view. You will have bad days, you will have good days. They're not all fantastic. But I'd be entirely agree with Chris. I've been journaling at night for, it must be nearly 6 years. And if I've kept the journals, and if you flick through, you almost go, oh, who was that guy? He was an idiot. So I'm quite sure that in a few years' time I'll wonder what this idiot was like on stage, right? But it might be years, because we do have our ups and downs in life because we're only human.
Don't be too harsh on that idiot. He was smart enough to start journaling as a self-improvement device. I just wanted to call out just before I say thank you to you all, Denise. I think you make an excellent point as well about asking for feedback from other people. I think having had the privilege of being involved in a Stoic philosophy focused discussion group for many years now, there is a massive benefit to be derived from having contact with other human beings and being able to sort of be a bit more vulnerable in that space to open yourself up to feedback from that. So
yeah. It's certainly absolutely essential if you're in a leadership role to be open to someone or creating a culture where they're comfortable to kind of tell you to pull your head in, because you can get very arrogant and you know, having a look at a certain person over in a certain country who has, you know, drunk their Kool-Aid for far too long. And you start to believe your own rhetoric. You think you're all powerful, and so you need people around you or a culture around you that are comfortable to come to you and say, "You've gone over the line, Denise, this time. So, you know, maybe you might like to rethink that."
No, exactly right. Just in the work context, that includes the people in your team. You need to have teams that you are getting real-time feedback from not just your boss and your peers, but from your people. And if you're doing that, then you're getting kept honest on a daily basis, and that's, again, exhausting.
Yes.
But really good and leads to better outcomes.
Yeah, and vice versa, that you're actually praising people that are doing stuff and telling people that was really courageous, or like, for example, Moses, that was really courageous to come up here today when you're very nervous and you don't know what you're going to say, but you did it. And that really helps people then to be more courageous the next time. It's an incremental thing. So yeah.
Yeah, doing to others as you would like to have done to yourself becomes even more important as you go up the ranks. Speaking from my own experience as well, leadership roles, absolutely.
all right. Well, can everyone please join me in thanking all our panelists?